At 9:17 a.m. on April 22, 1942, Lieutenant Commander Edward O'Hare stepped through the front doors of the Grumman Aircraft Engineering Factory at Bethpage, New York, carrying with him information that would soon reshape the air war in the Pacific. He was only 27, already credited with 7 confirmed kills, and still wore the Medal of Honor that the President himself had pinned to his chest the day before. Yet he wasn't there for applause or a tour. He was there because American fighter pilots were dying in outdated aircraft, outmatched by the Japanese Zero, and the Navy needed solutions faster than the war was unfolding. Waiting for him inside was William Schwendler, Grumman's lead designer, a man with 15 years of naval aircraft experience and the responsibility of creating the Wildcat's replacement. The contract had been signed almost a year earlier, long before Pearl Harbor, but the design still wasn't ready, and Schwendler knew that every flaw in the current aircraft was costing Americans their lives. O'Hare wasted no time explaining the bitter reality. The Wildcat was slower than the Zero, unable to climb as fast and hopeless in a turning fight. In a full turn, a Zero could circle nearly twice as quickly, and that difference meant the line between a pilot returning home or not returning at all. The Navy's doctrine demanded that Wildcat pilots never attempt to turn with a Zero, but instead rely on quick slashing attacks and then climb away. But even this tactic was flawed, because the Wildcat simply wasn't fast enough. Zeros could follow them through dives, chase them through climbs, and force American pilots into turning fights that always ended the same way. 42 Wildcats had been shot down in the war's first 4 months. Reports blamed pilot error, claiming doctrine wasn't being followed. But O'Hare, who had survived 14 brutal combat missions, knew that the problem wasn't poor flying. It was poor performance. He had told the Bureau of Aeronautics exactly that 2 weeks earlier. And the Bureau listened, not because O'Hare had a medal around his neck, but because of what he had done on February 20th, 1942. That day, he single-handedly defended the carrier Lexington against 9 Japanese bombers, shooting down 5 in under 5 minutes with only 60 rounds of ammunition. It was the most extraordinary display of aerial marksmanship the Navy had ever seen. But even more valuable than his victories was his experience. He understood the Wildcat's strengths and its fatal weaknesses better than anyone alive. So the Navy sent him to Grumman with one mission: tell the engineers everything. What the Zero could do, what the Wildcat couldn't, and what American pilots needed in the next fighter if they were going to survive the year. For 4 straight hours, O'Hare answered questions, sketched diagrams in the air with his hands, and walked the engineers through every moment of combat he could remember. He described how Zero pilots manipulated American fighters, luring them into turns, cutting into their climbs, and using their extraordinary range to appear unexpectedly far from their bases. He described the Wildcat's sluggish roll response, its underpowered climb, its dangerous hand-cranked landing gear that forced pilots to take one hand off the controls at the worst possible moment, and the poor visibility that obscured the most dangerous angles of attack. But he also explained the Wildcat's virtues. It was rugged and forgiving. It could absorb damage the Zero couldn't dream of surviving. Its .50 caliber guns were reliable and deadly. The problem wasn't the Wildcat's toughness. It was the fact that it couldn't get into the right position to use its guns effectively. Schwendler filled page after page with notes. He asked questions about every detail: how quickly the Zero rolled, how fast it gained altitude, what speeds pilots used when diving away, how far they could safely push the engine, and how the cockpit visibility impacted awareness during tight engagements. He wanted numbers, angles, real stories from real combat. And O'Hare gave him everything. But in the back of O'Hare's mind, there were ghosts, pilots he had watched take off who never returned. Men like Lieutenant James Gray, who died on February 21, 1942. Gray was experienced, disciplined, a man who followed doctrine exactly. He dove on a group of Zeros from altitude, fired a clean burst, and tried to climb out. But the Wildcat didn't have the power to escape. A Zero reversed course, dove from above, and destroyed him before he could gain safety. His wingman later said Gray had done everything right. But the Wildcat had not. O'Hare had watched 17 pilots die by late April. Some had been close friends. Others he barely knew. But they all flew into battle with the same weakness, an aircraft outclassed by its enemy. He discussed this with his squadron commander, John Thatch, who had devised the famous Thatch weave as a desperate workaround to the Zero's superior performance. But even Thatch admitted that tactics could only go so far. What the Navy needed was engineering, an aircraft capable of outclimbing, outrunning, and outfighting the Zero. When O'Hare arrived at Grumman, Schwendler already had something in the works, the F6F, the Wildcat successor. But O'Hare's feedback gave that design new urgency. When Schwendler asked O'Hare what the next fighter needed most, O'Hare didn't hesitate: power. Enough to climb faster than a Zero at altitude. Enough to outrun one in level flight. Enough to give American pilots control over the engagement. The Wildcat's 1,200 horsepower engine wasn't enough. The new fighter needed at least 2,000 horsepower. Schwendler mentioned the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp, a beast of an engine producing exactly that power. Could Grumman redesign the F6F around it? O'Hare said yes without hesitation. The entire Pacific War could turn on that decision. 4 days later, the Bureau of Aeronautics approved the changes. The second XF6F prototype would receive the R-2800 engine. The cockpit would be raised for visibility. Hydraulic landing gear would replace the hand-cranked system. Armor would be increased. The design would be strengthened. The wings would retain the Wildcat's 6.50 caliber guns, but with room for future upgrades. Every change O'Hare recommended was ordered into production. Grumman's engineers worked around the clock. The redesigned prototype, the XF6F3, was completed in a mere 8 weeks. The frame had to be reinforced to handle the new engine's torque. The landing gear needed entirely new hydraulics. The cockpit section was rebuilt. And despite the extra weight, the powerful Double Wasp engine transformed the aircraft. When test pilot Robert Hall took the prototype into the air on July 30, 1942, he immediately understood what the Navy hoped for: a Wildcat, but twice as fast, twice as responsive, and infinitely more capable. There were issues: engine overheating, slow landing gear extension, some gun timing problems, but nothing serious. Within 3 weeks, all flaws were corrected. And by October 3rd, the first production Hellcat took flight. Then production exploded. 12 in late 1942. 128 in early 1943. 130 in April alone. By summer, Grumman was producing 500 Hellcats every month, faster than the Navy could train pilots to fly them. This aircraft was unlike anything the Navy had ever fielded. And soon, it would reshape the Pacific War. The first squadron to receive the Hellcat was VF-9 at Naval Air Station Norfolk. When their commander, Lieutenant Commander Philip Torrey, first laid eyes on it, he knew the game had changed. Compared to the Wildcat, the Hellcat was enormous, heavier, longer, wider. Yet it was faster by over 60 miles per hour, climbed 1,000 feet per minute faster, had longer range, better visibility, and more armor. The pilots trained hard for 5 months, mastering the new aircraft. Then, in August 1943, they boarded the carrier Essex as part of Task Force 15 for the Hellcat's combat debut. Their target was Marcus Island. At dawn on August 31st, Hellcat streaked toward the island through the dim morning light. The Japanese were completely unprepared. Within minutes, ground aircraft, fuel depots, and radar positions were destroyed. 2 Hellcats were lost to anti-aircraft fire, but none to Japanese fighters. The raid proved the Hellcat's durability, speed, and stability under fire. Then came the real test, Wake Island, October 1943. 34 Zero fighters rose to meet the American strike force. The Hellcats tore through them, downing 22 Zeros while losing only 4 fighters to air combat. The kill ratio was something American pilots had never experienced before. But the most defining engagement came on December 4th at Kwajalein Atoll. 91 Hellcats faced 50 Zeros. The battle lasted just over half an hour. When it ended, 28 Japanese fighters had been destroyed. The Americans lost only 2. A 14-to-1 kill ratio. The Zero's dominance was finished. Japanese pilots noticed immediately. Veteran aces like Saburo Sakai tried the same tactics they'd used for 2 years, baiting climbs, forcing turns, diving and reversing, but they no longer worked. Hellcats climbed faster than expected, rolled quicker, accelerated harder, and simply refused to fall behind. Sakai himself, once one of Japan's most feared pilots, was forced to break off combat for the first time when facing a Hellcat. By mid-1944, the Hellcat wasn't just a new fighter. It was a symbol of American industrial speed, engineering precision, and tactical evolution. And everything it was grew from the lessons O'Hare had delivered in that meeting at Grumman. When the Battle of the Philippine Sea erupted on June 19, 1944, the Hellcat reached its moment of destiny. Japanese carriers launched wave after wave of aircraft. The Hellcats butchered them. 42 shot down in the first raid. 98 in the second. More across the remainder of the day. Japanese air power was effectively annihilated, giving birth to the phrase American pilots joked about for years, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Among the heroes of that day was Commander David McCampbell, who shot down 7 Japanese aircraft in a single mission. Then, months later, he did it again, 9 kills in one sortie during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, becoming a double ace in a day. He landed with empty tanks and 2 bullets left, having achieved the most successful 2-man aerial engagement in U.S. naval history. He would finish the war with 34 victories, all in Hellcats. And behind the Hellcats' victories, behind every pilot who lived to fly another day, was a moment in April 1942, when a young Medal of Honor recipient stepped into a Long Island factory with a simple truth. American pilots weren't losing because they were bad pilots. They were losing because they needed a better machine. And thanks to the collaboration between Edward O'Hare and William Schwendler, they got it. The Hellcat became the aircraft that turned the air war in the Pacific, reclaimed the skies from the Zero, and changed the course of World War II forever.